The rain fell in soft, rhythmic patterns on the glass windows of a modest bank, nestled in the heart of the bustling city. Despite the gloomy weather, the usual morning crowd had gathered, some clutching umbrellas, others shaking droplets off their coats as they stepped inside. Everyone was waiting for their number to be called, and every minute seemed too long to wait. Amid the line of well-dressed customers stood Martha, an elderly woman who seemed out of place. Her worn coat bore evidence of many winters, and the old-fashioned hat on her head. Martha held her handbag tightly, her fingers trembling slightly as she rummaged through it, searching for the familiar stack of papers she had carefully prepared the night before. When it was her turn, she presented her papers to a young bank teller behind the counter. The teller barely glanced at her before raising an eyebrow and letting out an audible sigh. "Ma'am, these forms are outdated. I can't process your request with this documentation," he said brusquely. Martha's brow furrowed, her voice shaking as she responded, "But I've used these same forms before, dear. Now they've always been fine. Could you please double-check?" The teller rolled his eyes, raising his voice so the other customers could hear. "I'm telling you, ma'am, it's not valid anymore. You need to leave and come back with the correct paperwork. Other passengers are still waiting behind." Martha's face turned pale. She looked around, but most of the onlookers avoided her gaze. A few murmurs rippled through the line, impatience growing as the minutes ticked by. Martha clutched the counter, warring with her growing sense of helplessness. Then, from near the entrance, a tall figure stepped forward. He appeared with a look calm and collected. Rick Harrison is known to millions as the hard-working star of a popular television show. He dressed casually in a plain jacket and cap as an ordinary customer, but he had quickly attracted in the scene unfolding at the counter, and something in Martha's posture struck a chord deep within him. Without hesitation, Rick walked towards Martha, his shoes thudding softly against the tiled floor. He placed a reassuring hand on Martha's shoulder, his voice warm and steady as he addressed her. "Ma'am, is everything all right here?" Martha turned to face him, startled by the unexpected kindness in his tone. She blinked, momentarily at a loss for words, before nodding slightly. I just need to withdraw some money. It's for my rent and medicine, but they say my papers aren't good anymore." Rick looked at the teller, his expression calm but firm. "You work in a bank," Rick began. "That means you're not just handling transaction. You're communicating and helping with people. People who trust you with their hard-earned money and their livelihoods. You had not helped today, and instead, you turned her away. Do you think that's acceptable?" The teller opened his mouth to respond, but Rick held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "Look, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Why don't you check the system and see if there's a way to help her out?" Rick's words and actions had not only eased Martha's worries, but also reminded everyone in the room that kindness still had a place in their fast-paced, impersonal world. The bank teller shifted uncomfortably under Rick's steady gaze. His earlier confidence seemed to waver as the weight of the moment sank in. A hush fell over the bank as customers turned their attention to the unfolding exchange. "The system doesn't allow transactions without the updated forms," the teller said. Rick raised an eyebrow, his tone polite but firm. "The system, huh? It's funny how that seems to work when it's convenient, but there should be flexibility here. So maybe you could take another look at the system and see what you can do for this woman." Martha watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She wasn't used to having someone stand up for her, let alone a man like Rick Harrison. His calm assurance made her feel less invisible, and for the first time, in what felt like hours, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "I don't mean to cause trouble," Martha murmured, clutching the edges of her worn handbag. It's just that I need this money to pay my rent. They said they'd give me more time, but only until today. And I can't afford the late fees for my medication. Oh. Her voice broke on the last word, and Rick's expression softened. He turned back to the teller, leaning in slightly. You hear that? This isn't just about rules and paperwork. This is about someone's life. Oh. The manager of the branch, a middle-aged woman with a professional demeanor, had been observing the scene from a distance. Sensing the gravity of the situation, she stepped forward. Ciao, I am the bank manager, she began, her tone conciliatory. I sincerely apologize for what happened today. I assure you, we'll address this immediately. Oh, I appreciate that, Rick replied, his gaze steady. Don't apologize to me, apologize to this woman. But an apology alone isn't enough. It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through this. The manager nodded. You're right. We will review and improve our employees' work style in customer service. She turned to Martha. Miss, I deeply regret the inconvenience and distress we caused you today. Please accept this as a token of our apology. The teller, a young man, sat pensively at his desk for a moment. Under the gazes of the still-watching customers, he felt extremely guilty and uncomfortable. Rick's words still echoed in his mind. I know I was wrong, and he began, his voice trailing off. She turned to Mrs. Karen and said, I'm sorry. He paused for a moment, then continued. I didn't want to make her feel that way, but I didn't know what to do in that situation. Mrs. Karen looked at him patiently. It's okay, but I also understand that you're someone who doesn't always find it easy to deal with situations like that. The important thing is that you know how to make things right and not let it happen again. The teller nodded, feeling a little relieved, but also aware that he needed to change his approach to work. The employee tries to find and test Martha's account on the screen. As he typed, Rick guided Martha to a nearby chair. Let's have you sit down while we sort this out. Ms. Jenkins, he said gently, you've been standing long enough. Oh, thank you, Martha replied, her voice barely above a whisper. You're very kind. Oh. As the tension in the room shifted, Rick turned his attention back to Martha. What's your name? Ma'am? Oh, Martha, she replied softly. Martha Jenkins. He smiled and said, well, Ms. Jenkins, I'm Rick, he said. To meet her eyes, where is your family? Why are you here alone? Hush. Martha hesitated, then offered a small smile. I've been managing on my own for years. Lost my husband a while back. And my kids are, well, they've got their struggles. I don't want to bother them. You see, I just come here once a month to withdraw my little pension and make sure the bills are paid. It's not much, but it's enough to get by. At least, it used to be. Rick nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. He could see the determination etched into her face, the quiet resilience of someone who had faced life's hardships without complaint. The teller interrupted their conversation, clearing his throat awkwardly. I've managed to find her account. It's valid, but the system flagged it because the forms haven't been updated in a while. I can process the withdrawal, but she'll need to update the paperwork next time. Oh, great, Rick said, standing up. Let's get that done, then. And next time, maybe lead with that instead of dismissing her. Huh? Hush. The teller nodded sheepishly and completed the transaction. He stepped forward, received from that employee, and handed Martha the cash. Rick noticed her hands trembling slightly. She took the envelope and placed it gently into her bag. There you go, Ms. Jenkins. All set, he said warmly. Martha's eyes filled with tears, not just from relief, but from gratitude. She clasped Rick's hand in both of hers, her voice shaking. I don't know how to thank you, Rick. I don't know where I would be today without you. Rick smiled, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "You don't have to thank me. And if you ever run into trouble like this again, don't be afraid to speak up. People like me are around to help." As the tension in the bank began to dissipate, the other customers resumed their activities. Some exchanged glances, their expressions tinged with a mix of shame and admiration. It wasn't every day that someone stepped forward to stand up for what was right, and Rick's actions left an undeniable impression on everyone present. As Martha clutched her bag, now filled with enough money to cover her rent and medication, her relief was almost palpable. Then, Rick goes to the manager. He gestured to a nearby row of chairs. "If I may suggest something, why not set up a dedicated service desk for seniors and others who might need extra assistance? It's a small change, but it could make a world of difference for people like Ms. Jenkins." The manager's face lit up with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "That's an excellent idea. I'll bring it up at our next operations meeting." Satisfied, Rick returned to Martha. "How about we get you home now?" he offered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Oh, no, I couldn't trouble you," Martha replied, though her tone suggested she was more than a little tempted. "It's no trouble at all," Rick said, already signaling for a car. "Besides, I'd feel better knowing you got back safe." As they stepped outside into the drizzle, Rick held an umbrella over Martha and escorted her to the waiting vehicle. On the short ride to her modest apartment, they talked about her late husband, her children, and her hopes for the future. Rick listened intently, offering words of encouragement that brought a genuine smile to her face for the first time that day. When they arrived, Rick ensured she was settled inside, before handing her a small envelope. "What's this?" Martha asked, her brow furrowed. "Just a little something to make things easier," Rick said casually. Martha opened it hesitantly, her eyes widening as she saw several bills inside. "I can't accept this," she protested, though her voice wavered with emotion. "Yes, you can," Rick insisted gently. "This is just a small gift from me. I would be happy if you accepted it. You deserve it." Martha clutched the envelope to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Rick. You've done more for me than I could ever repay." Rick smiled and tipped his hat. "Take good care of yourself. That's the most meaningful thank you to me." After driving for a while, they arrived at Martha's house, and they happily said goodbye to each other. When he left, he knew he hadn't solved all her problems, but he'd given her a little hope. And sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Back at the bank, the air was thick with unease after Rick and Martha had left. The young teller sat at his station, visibly shaken. The manager called the teller into her office, where a discussion about Kerr's problems. True to her word, the manager didn't let the incident fade into obscurity. That very afternoon tomorrow, she organized a meeting, proposing the idea Rick had suggested: a dedicated service desk for elderly customers and those requiring extra assistance. Within weeks, the bank implemented the change across all its branches, earning widespread praise from the community. For Martha, life began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. The envelope Rick had given her proved to be a lifeline. With the money, she was able to settle her rent for 3 months and purchase the medication she desperately needed. The relief of having a financial cushion allowed her to focus on improving her health and reconnecting with a few old friends she hadn't seen in years. Word of Rick's actions began to spread. A local journalist who had witnessed the incident at the bank wrote an article about the story, titled "A Golden Heart in the City." The piece highlighted Rick's intervention and how it inspired the bank's new customer service policy. The article went viral, earning widespread acclaim. What Rick didn't expect, however, was how his gesture would inspire others. What started as a simple gesture had blossomed into a movement. A bakery offered free loaves of bread to seniors having difficulty. A local mechanic started a discount program for elderly customers needing car repairs. Even the teller, who had initially dismissed Martha, began volunteering at a community center, determined to make amends for his behavior. Martha's life, once marked by quiet struggles and solitude, began to shift in ways she had never imagined. Encouraged by Rick's thoughtful gestures and the warmth of the community's newfound support, she began to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. The world, which had once felt indifferent, now seemed filled with glimmers of kindness and hope. Rick Harrison's story is not only a living testament to compassion and humility, but also a profound reminder of the important role each individual plays in protecting the vulnerable in society. His act of helping Martha left a strong mark, not only because it meant so much to her, but also because it reflected a quality that few people in modern society can demonstrate naturally and confidently: the courage to stand up for those who cannot protect themselves. Rick's act of standing up for Martha was not only an immediate relief for her, but also a lesson in how to treat those around us, regardless of who they are. In today's society, we are often caught up in the whirlwind of life with our concerns and busy work, and sometimes we forget the core values of compassion and respect. This story is not simply a one-time act of help from Rick Harrison, but also a call for everyone to look at how we treat those around us. From the smallest things, like taking the time to listen, understand, and help, to the bigger actions, like standing up against injustice or protecting the vulnerable, all can make a big difference. He chose to act simply and naturally, without needing to brag or expect recognition. This is an important lesson in humility, about how we don't need to seek the spotlight or praise when doing the right thing. Sometimes, the most beautiful actions are the ones that no one knows about, that don't need to be ostentatious, but have the power to change someone's life most profoundly. Ultimately, Rick Harrison's story is not only a beautiful act, but also a message of hope. These actions, no matter how small, will contribute to shining a light on beautiful values in society, encourage others to do the same, and help build a stronger, more united community. Have you ever had the courage to stand up and help others in difficult times without having to be fussy or wait for recognition? In the future, if we encounter such stories, let's stop for a moment and start doing simple things. Small acts of kindness that can make a difference. They can create a wave of big change in the community. Together, we can build a world where kindness, respect, and sharing are always present in every encounter. Be a part of that change, starting today.